Hey everyone. In this talk, I'm speaking with Tactical Alpinism, who is a former company commander in 10th Mountain Division. He's been involved in mountaineering and climbing before and during his military career, and is one of the rare cases where someone who is really passionate and knowledgeable about the technical piece of mountaineering was in charge of a mountain unit. I recorded this a couple months ago, and since then he actually climbed Denali, which is the highest peak in North America, and is a pretty big deal. He detailed this trip really well on his Instagram page, as well as he has some other great info on that page. So if this talk is something that interests you, go check him out. I'm going to pick up in our conversation when I asked him about how much of a focus the 10th Mountain Division had on actual mountaineering and what he thinks about Fort Drum.
I mean, I think it's even less that it's like mountains weren't the focus, and it's like mountains are hard. So we're generally going to avoid them until we know we have a mission that we have to do in
Right.
there. And I think we saw that painted super clearly in the early days in Afghanistan, like where we had Operation Anaconda and people just weren't ready for the weather, never mind the vertical elevation gain and loss. And then like you even see it when you have people that are departing Afghanistan, like when they're doing their rips, and the companies that have been on the ground for a few months, or the platoons or the guys, like they're just billy goating around the guys that have just arrived. And like partially it's altitude, but it's also fitness. And then I'd argue more so the thing that takes more time to develop is the comfort in the terrain. It's the first time you walk under nods, it's uncomfortable and scary and hard. And you're tripping everywhere because you don't understand. And then as you spend more time under nods, you get used to walking under night vision with that green globe in front of you. And it's the same thing with moving through like different types of terrain, where you get more comfortable moving through that type of terrain as you spend more time in it. And a perfect
Yeah.
example is like a decent time on the incline in Colorado is about 45 minutes. It's 2,000 feet of elevation gain. The record time is something around 16 minutes. Like that's just a stairmaster essentially. Like you can then take that to the big mountains where like it takes the average person 12 hours to make it to the summit of Mount Shasta, which is a 7,000 vertical feet of elevation gain. And then you have somebody like Jack Kunsley, who's a former SEAL, who just set the FKT on it of just over 2 hours round trip.
Damn.
And he just also did it for Rainier too, where he did 3 hours, 4 minutes for Rainier. And those people that are doing it like Mount Shasta in 12 hours, it's not the person that is like super fit and going out to do this. It's somebody who just like saw a mountain and thought it was cool and comes from their desk job. And I'd argue that soldiers should be at a higher level of fitness than that.
Although, with the amount of stuff going on, it seems like we've become desk job having people.
Yeah. One of the most common things I hear about the 10th Mountain Division is like, oh, like, why'd you put them somewhere without mountains?
Yeah.
But like the Adirondacks are an hour away, and
Yeah.
it's a badass mountain range. Like people
Yeah.
discredit how rugged and how remote that range is. And like the biggest issue I see is not the location for that unit. It's really the policies that they have in place. Because when I was a commander there, it took division commander approval to do offsite training for PT, never mind a training event.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate. A couple of guys in Vermont, they'll head over to the Adirondacks a couple of times a season, and I always wonder what exactly dudes in 10th Mountain did in the Adirondacks because it's huge, huge, biggest state
Yeah.
park in the nation, I think.
So I know of one scout platoon that went and did a training event there because the battalion commander really fought for it in the brigade I was in. And then currently the light fighter school, about 2 weeks ago, they were They've set up 3 lanes in the Adirondacks, and now they're in the approval process with the Park Service.
When you look at the European bases, they're like mountain training areas. It's
Yep.
all this like they were able to for somehow like make that Army government land, And I think at this point, I don't think there's many swaths of land left for the government or the Army to swoop up. But I think state land is probably the best bet for good training areas.
And you don't even have to like swoop up any land. Like, to be honest, the like military to other government agency like Department of the Interior for the National Park Service or National Forest Service, BLM, like all of it's fairly user friendly as long as you like get to know who to talk to and fill out the memorandums of understanding. And like if you get some top down pressure from like Pentagon level and or congressional level, then it would be even easier. But like that's the way I do training right now. With the cadets, it's all BLM and National Forest land. It's just memorandums of understanding with the landowner and then also like the sheriff's department. And it's so like I did the Austrians phase 2 of their mountaineering progression, or their like mountain guide progression with their military.
So you know that training area then that we were in.
Well, so they didn't use training areas. We were just in the Alps in an alpine hut.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Like so we spent like we were in there were I think 5 or 6 different student groups. Each student group was in a different hut. And then we like trained in vicinity of that hut and then did a few longer climbs or tours where we would like pass through some of the other huts on the way. But it was their progression within the Austrian system. It was 9 steps when I did it, that was 2011, could be different now. But it took you from like learning how to ski as level 1 to IFMGA certification as the level 9. And it generally took, they said 5 to 9 years for people to complete, which is about how long it takes for most IFMGA certifications. Like 3 years is the fast track.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it is crazy what a commitment, just mountaineering in general is just like a long-term commitment.
Yep.
And obviously, there's people like you that seem to make it sort of like a lifelong endeavor, but you're not necessarily sort of like kept in that area of expertise.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a like other than the Echo designator. There's no like qualification or specialty for mountaineering, mountain warfare, like for like dive, for example, or like some other specialties like Sapper Ranger, like you can go be an instructor. But the throughput that we have in the Army schoolhouse in particular is so minuscule compared to the demand. Like, I mean, my understanding of the Marine Corps school is that they can put a battalion through at a time. And then they like separate the unit, train them on individual skills that like the different parts of the unit need, and then bring them back together for an FTX. And like, I think that would be an ideal, whereas like you could run a battalion through Jericho at a time. And like Jericho's kind of small to run a battalion exercise in. I almost wonder if creating lanes is the right answer, or if like specifying what the standards are. And like the example being to go through each level of the IFMGA track within the American Mountain Guide Association, you have to have certain prerequisites in order to even sit for it. Like to become a ski guide, to go to the ski guide course, you have to have your professional avalanche level 1. You have to have avalanche level 1 and avalanche rescue. So that's 3 different avalanche courses. Like you have to have skied and climbed a certain amount of things of certain difficulty. And we don't have that defined for like the level 1, 2, and 3 military mountaineers, we call them, for the Army. And so like, for example, like for a level 3, like if we want to compare it to like say level 3 combatives where it's like they can run a combatives tournament, well, like the level 3 mountaineer should be able to run like a battalion level mountain exercise.
Right.
But to do that, they probably need the experience to like plan and execute their own individual expedition to climb or ski some objective. Like the objective doesn't really matter as long as it meets like maybe a certain amount of vertical elevation gain or on glaciated terrain or like some sort of qualifier.
Yep.
And I think that sort of like mission command where it's put out the criteria and let the lower echelons like execute the mission. I think that we have a hard time accepting that kind of risk. Can that individual go do an avalanche rescue? I don't need every soldier to be avalanche level 1 qualified, but I need every soldier to either, if we don't want to do avalanche transceivers for everybody, be able to do a probe line.
Yeah.
Like left, center, right, left, right, center. Like everybody step forward, left, right, center, step forward. Like that's a probe line. Or if we have transceivers, and like every individual should be able to locate 1 or 2 transceivers within 7 minutes, say for two transceivers. That's the Pro 1 standard, I think, is 2 transceivers within a 50 meter by 50 meter area within 7 or 8 minutes. Like it's a fairly achievable standard. As long as you've practiced once or twice. And then but then elevating it to collective level is like, can a squad or a platoon locate 5 transceivers within a 50 meter or 100 meter by 100 meter area? Because then that gets a lot more complex with signal overlap and a bunch of other issues with transceivers, and then command and control too.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be interesting to sort of mirror the ARI, I guess, requirements. And, it is interesting. You think about like, oh, people are busy. How could you get a whole battalion through like an ARI level 1 course? But then I thought about it. I'm like, this is people's jobs. You have them for years and years and years. There should be no reason why it's unattainable to get, a whole battalion worth of people through at least ARI 1 and rescue.
ARI 1 is a 3-day course or a 2-day hybrid course with online learning. I think that from a plan, because ARI 1's a little bit more about planning and what is avalanche terrain. Like the rescue is a small portion of it. So I think if we're talking existing avalanche education, then the avalanche rescue course is a thing that every soldier should go through that's in the mountain unit. And then ARI 1 would be what every probably squad leader, ideally team leader, but squad leader, so they can be part of the decision-making conversation with a PL platoon sergeant. And then ARI 2 would be PL platoon sergeant and above, because ARI 2 is decision-making in avalanche terrain. And like, how do you still move through avalanche terrain when the hazard is elevated? Like ARI 1, you leave and it's like, okay, if I go into avalanche terrain and it's anything but low danger, I'm going to die. And that's how you leave it. And that's not a bad thing, because like for me, the weekend I left my ARI 1 course, I went out, I checked the snowpack. I was like, okay, this is dangerous. So I went like up and around the slope and skied something else, came back the next day and the whole slope is slid. So it's like, cool. Like it was dangerous. Like, good job.
Right.
But there's a lot more nuance to it, and risk that you can accept intentionally, because it's not really risky if you understand the nuances. And that's what ARI 2 starts to teach.
Right.
And then I think looking at a larger organizational level, like it's super easy to actually get that built into like a battalion or brigade. Like a brigade could easily have an ARI instructor, because it takes doing your basic avalanche education, like being able to ski, probably, because most of the avalanche courses happen on skis. And then, so ARI 1, avalanche rescue, and then you can go straight to your Pro 1. Once you have Pro 1, you can take the instructor course. And once you have the instructor course, you can teach area avalanche education.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that for any unit operating even near the mountains, I would think, and I don't know what it is right now in the active army. Maybe it's nothing, but I feel like it should be a big requirement because whether you're on foot, skis, snowmobiles, or even when you're talking about like air insertion, I would think that everyone would want to know what the danger is because even if you're talking air assault, like if you don't understand what's going on up there, you could get plopped on. If you're not plopped directly on something that's unsafe, you might be completely surrounded by things that are unsafe, right?
Yeah, I mean, mechanized means of movement like SUSV, snowmobile, air, like requires even more awareness of it because you can cover so much more terrain and over just a 10-kilometer area. Never mind a 10-kilometer area, just aspect to aspect. Like, are you on the east or are you on a west? Like the conditions change so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's the reason I think that we don't put attention to it. It was brought to my awareness by an interaction I had with my old battalion commander. And when I was getting ready to take my company to like learn how to ski in Jericho at Camp Ethan Allen, and we had the skis, the really shitty universal bindings that are essentially split board bindings. And the heels don't lock down because as soon as you step on the heel piece, they bend and they don't work anymore. So you just ski with a heel unlocked and it's no releasability. So you'll have a few catastrophic injuries. But once you get past all that, you then have like my boss's answer. You have boots. Okay, how are you connecting to the skis? And my boss's answer is like, well, just use leather Gore-Tex boots. It'll be fine. And if you don't ski and you don't travel in that terrain, then you're like, well, yeah, we just have it. Like, what's the big deal? Just go do it. And so when he came out to visit while we were doing that training, and we had gotten with the mountain school and they'd loaned us boots, and they actually loaned the boots to the guys to take down to Chile as well, because it wasn't during a phase time of the year when they were going to be using them.
Yep.
So we'd gotten the hard boots. We'd set some aside for my battalion commander and sergeant major. Battalion commander, sergeant major come up, and my first sergeant and I take them out and teach them how to ski. And they're like, oh, now I get it.
Yeah.
Like now I get why like these boots are important. And it's just they didn't have, because they haven't done the thing. They don't have the expertise. They just don't have the scope to make a good decision from. And one of the unfortunate things we do is we tell commanders that you have to be decisive, have the answer, and do the thing. And that often leads to not listening to people that have the experience.
Yeah. And I think especially specifically when we're talking about skiing is it's even harder for new people to learn how to ski if they're on those skis that you're talking about, the snowboard bindings and the leather boots where you can't really transfer your weight. And so it's just like compounding problems, right? Mm-hmm. And then they fall and then they get either injured or discouraged. And it's just
we had 2 catastrophic injuries.
Yeah.
Like one spiral tip fib and one shattered ankle.
Oof.
Like even with hard boots.
Oh, wow.
And so like circling back to where this like line of thought started is like mountain stuff's hard. Like the 11th Airborne had a group of their leadership a few months ago do a movement on snowshoes. And the S3 who planned it, the main comment he got was like, this was one of the hardest physical things I've ever done. And it was a fairly short movement on snowshoes. I don't remember the distance, but it's just moving on snowshoes is hard. Moving uphill is hard. And like everything's going to be slower. Everything's going to be harder.
Yeah. And it's definitely one of those things where, I don't want to offend like armor people or pilots, but I feel like those are problems where you could spend more money and get a better plane. You could spend more money add reactive armor, to a tank or something like that. But mountaineering, you can't just spend more money. I mean, you can spend more money to get a little bit better equipment, but at the end of the day, it's investing more in people than it is equipment, and getting those experiences, like going out for PT and getting on snowshoes versus just go running inside on the treadmill.
Yeah. And I think like my hope is that like big army, Department of the Army level has recognized that we became a generalist force. Like in Afghanistan, with Afghanistan and Iraq, we became a very general force because every unit had to be able to do the same job essentially. Like you had field artillery units that were doing the infantry's job, and you had units from desert locations like formerly Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, doing like going to the mountains of Afghanistan, or you had like people from the jungle, or not the jungles, but the forest of Fort Bragg going to Afghanistan or go to the desert of Iraq. So we became a generalist force, and environment didn't necessarily matter. And we're starting to shift back to being a little bit more specific. And from the DA level, where I've been noticing that is like we had jungle school stood up in Hawaii, and we have at least the new facility at the Mountain Warfare School that got built. And so I think it'll be a matter of time until staffing increases. I hope staffing increases there. And I think that our doctrine doesn't match up to the requirement at all. So like the doctrine is another piece, but we're moving back to being a specialized. I hope we are moving back to being a specialized force, because what then happens is if, say, 11th Airborne and 10th Mountain are the mountain specialists for the Army, and we need to send a unit to the Himalaya or Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, then that's the unit that goes to that location. And then the unit that's going to fill in and fill that gap afterwards, maybe they're the 82nd coming from Bragg, but they're going to be able to do that train up because they now know they're going. But that initial unit is able to fill the gap because they have the specialization. And flip-flop it, where you have the 25th, like we go to a jungle location, say in the Southeast Pacific, then the 25th would go, and maybe Fort Drum, 10th Mountain, would then train on jungle stuff. But we've become too general, so we've lost the skills for the environments, and we don't have the resident expertise to build it up.
Yeah. Well, like you said, hopefully it's changing. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you've looked into the Kargil conflict between Pakistan and India, 1999.
No.
Highest elevation battle ever fought.
Okay.
Fighting over the Siachen Glacier. Basically, Pakistanis, although they say they weren't Pakistani army, but Pakistanis went up to a high, this high ridge line that separates the border between India and Pakistan. And in the winter, it's uninhabitable. And what they did was they went and occupied it first in the spring, but they occupied the Indian side versus the Pakistani side. And we're firing down and basically preventing the Indian army from occupying their positions. And history's always muddled, but Bill Clinton threatened to get involved, threatened to send the 10th Mountain Division to go to go route these Pakistanis off of literally the highest peak that people have ever fought on. And it makes me wonder if what if Pakistan called his bluff.
I mean, I imagine that peak was probably between 17 and 20,000 feet. I don't know the elevation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for somebody coming from sea level, which is where the 10th Mountain is, it's going to take you at least a week to acclimate to go up that high, and you're still going to feel like shit.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting. The military actually has the most research out there about altitude acclimation. like for some reason we're weirdly obsessed with it. But then we like from a medical perspective, like there are a few medical papers out there on acclimation that the Army has produced. And yet we don't so much care about like actually doing things in the mountains. It's kind of a weird break in comms there. Avalanche education isn't just important so that people like units can survive in the mountains, because like survival is the base thing, but if we're just trying to survive, then we're not actually going to be a successful fighting force. And you see that from any units on the defensive for a long time where they're just getting beat down. Like a defense is to reconsolidate for the offense. And the avalanche education will also allow units, if they leverage it, to like utilize terrain to their advantage, whether it be for axes of advance or it be to like create obstacles using avalanches, or even like if you have the right problem on the right aspect. Like we saw this in the Winter War 1939 with the Finns against the Russians, and you also saw it in World War One with the Austrians and the Swiss, where like in that conflict with the Austrians and the Swiss, in 3 days in December of I believe it was 1917, you had 9,000 to 10,000 soldiers killed by avalanches.
Yeah,
because they had a really high avalanche risk or hazard rating, where it was like they were having significantly large avalanches. And like one in particular, a barracks was hit and 300 soldiers were killed.
Yeah.
And it's unknown, like from at least the research I've done, it's unknown if any of those were triggered intentionally. But if natural avalanches can kill that many people, imagine what intentional human triggers can do.
Yeah.
And you can trigger them with artillery. You can trigger them with explosives. You can trigger them by stepping on a slope as an individual scout sniper that just happens to see a company of infantry people in the pass below you. So like a two-man sniper team could kill a company given the right terrain, right location.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And even 2016 in India, the same thing. Barracks got buried, and I think around 150 people were buried and killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, even if you're thinking we're in the mountains, but we're not going out anywhere. We're just on this base. Obviously, it's still important to know because danger could be building up all around you.
Yeah. And that's actually what is taught in the Avalanche Pro 2 level. Like Avalanche Pro 2 largely focuses on infrastructure because it's meant for highway and ski area risk mitigation. And that translates perfectly to military application of like, where do you place the TOC? And you also saw it in World War One with the Austrians and the Swiss, where like in that conflict with the Austrians and the Swiss, in 3 days in December of I believe it was 1917, you had 9,000 to 10,000 soldiers killed by avalanches.
Yeah,
because they had a really high avalanche risk or hazard rating, where it was like they were having significantly large avalanches. And like one in particular, a barracks was hit and 300 soldiers were killed.
Yeah.
And it's unknown, like from at least the research I've done, it's unknown if any of those were triggered intentionally. But if natural avalanches can kill that many people, imagine what intentional human triggers can do.
Yeah.
And you can trigger them with artillery. You can trigger them with explosives. You can trigger them by stepping on a slope as an individual scout sniper that just happens to see a company of infantry people in the pass below you. So like a two-man sniper team could kill a company given the right terrain, right location.
All right. I want to change gears a little bit, get a little bit more into specific things, right? So when we talk about airy and civilian ski tour stuff, right? We have this whole planning process, and like morning meetings before we go out on ski tours. How do you see that working in the tactical setting? Like, is that part of an op order? Are we, are we building this into some sort of daily forecast, depending on where we are? Like, where do you see that fitting into everything?
Yeah, I see it as being part of the operations order. Like we already have it built because we have OACOC for like our obstacles and etc. And I I would argue that in the mountains you could add an O for objective hazard to the OACOC like setup, or you could just include it as an obstacle because it could be considered a natural obstacle. I prefer the objective hazard, like in just adding that, like so call OACU if you want. And I think that would, because then you can look at like in that discussion, like aspect, you can look at refreeze, thaw, you can look at winds, you can look at temperature, like weather's already in the operations order. I just think it means that paragraph 1 it needs to expand on the amount of attention put onto it,
Yeah.
because the natural environment has a lot more of a say there, in what's going to happen. Like perfect example, not avalanche related, but I was on Rainier this past weekend and the forecast changed. Went from a max of 10-mile-per-hour winds to 40 miles per hour sustained with 80-mile-per-hour gusts. And every tent where we were sleeping got flattened. Like it changes, but if you don't look at the weather and continue to update daily, then you're not going to have the information to
Right.
adjust and actually execute your operations.
Yeah, right on. We covered all the stuff that I had planned. Is there anything else? I feel like we could talk for a long time.
Yeah. No, I
But
think we've hit a lot. And I'd love to see some flexibility. Like when we talk the base level a lot. And I'd love to see some deliberate thought by Department of the Army or whoever's making the decision to put standards to what we need to do in the mountains. And with that, like we have an EIB checklist or a skill level 10 checklist or the expert soldier badge checklist. I'm like, in order to disassemble, reassemble, do a function check on an M4 carbine, you have to check these blocks, or to put on a pro mask and clear it, react to chemical attack. You have to check these blocks. And it's the same thing with mountain skills. And maybe the mountains, I haven't been to our mountain school. Maybe the mountain schoolhouse has that to a point. But the schools I've been to that I've learned the most from are the ones who set the baseline of expectation by having a checklist. In the Q Special Forces Q course, Small Unit Tactics SUT is a great example where they teach a very specific checklist stepwise way to execute say an ambush. And like once you can do it that perfect way every time, then you can start to innovate. And we don't have that in the mountains. So we get in our own way on even letting soldiers learn the skills because they don't even have a checklist or a video that they can really go check to learn. And so my goal, like what I'd love to do, is create a resource so that soldiers can learn those like individual tasks that they can then apply tactically. Because I'm not going to tell them how to apply it tactically to their individual thing. I want to give them the information, the tools, so that they can then innovate because they're smarter than I am.
right. Yeah, I know. I mean, we definitely have score sheets at mountain school, right? Setting up different systems and stuff like that. But you're teaching, individuals sort of like tools that they can use, but maybe in real life, maybe they don't need to set up a whole system. Maybe they could do a terrain belay or stuff like that. And so it is a fine line between how do you gauge whether or not someone actually understands things versus can they just spit out, the checklist for how to make a Casevac system,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, oh, this is this many points. Well, in real life, there's no points. Either the system works or doesn't work, and stuff like that. But yeah, it does circle back sort of towards the Marine Corps um, model, where at the end of teaching individual skills, now they go accomplish something as a unit. And I think that's really a good metric is, okay, did you get everyone from point A to point B? Was it efficient? Was it, quick? Were there any casualties? Were you in any major risk? But it would be nice to see things expanded past the individual level, and actually, test units to see not only against other units, but see year over year, like, oh, we invested this much time and money into a ski program. Well, did that actually help an infantry battalion? Like, okay, this whole battalion learns how to ski. Maybe this battalion, only the scouts learned how to ski. Like, how do they perform, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like we love numbers and we love measuring things. And it's sometimes just hard because like when you get to like, did this battalion perform well? Well, so many of the conditions change over were the OPFOR in the right place? Did the battalions do the right thing with pull and security? How is their planning timeline? Like there's so many like immeasurable things that just the unit ends up being more effective or less effective. And like I think for units that are considering like doing ski training, at a minimum, I'd recommend the scouts because then they can move faster and set the track. And ideally, you'd have a specified echelon or organization at a certain unit level. It could be you have a company in a battalion. You could have a squad or a platoon in a company, like, or you could have a fire team in a platoon, like that can break trail. Because like trail breaking, you're supposed to have two teams that rotate, and there's a trail breaking squad.
Right.
And so like some sort of organizational breakdown, because the biggest negative to skiing is it takes time. And when I say time, it's like in a 30-second briefing, I can give a soldier a pair of snowshoes and they can go walk and be okay.
Right.
For skis, it's going to take a 40-hour week to make people like competent to not break themselves and to like be able to not ski, but do like move across snow without hurting themselves.
Yeah.
And then it takes years to get to an expert level of proficiency.
Yeah.
And that the years can be cut down with time, but units don't like to give the time.
Right.
Because we have anti-terrorism level 1 and rifle qualifications to do.
Right. Yeah, I sort of pitched the idea a little while ago on one of the articles that I wrote, but I was equating it to like pilots getting flight hours. If you're in a squad that's designated to, this is the ski squad in the platoon, like better log those hours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I say 25 days to like be proficient on skis, and then 100 days to like really get to that solid level. And for some people that can take years.
Yeah.
For some, it's a season.
Yeah.
But
well,
yeah.
I mean, we talked about skiing and avalanche specific stuff. I'm sure there's plenty more to talk about, and maybe in the future, we find a different topic. But yeah, appreciate you taking the time. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you made it this far, thanks for listening. Feel free to reach out to me over email or social media and let me know your thoughts on this stuff. I definitely agree with him about us having more to explore about standards for maybe avalanche training and what exactly we want mountaineers to be able to do in the broader scope of mountaineering and not just the technical skills. Again, thanks for listening and keep your eyes open for more of these talks.